to begin to tackle that question, let's start at the most fundamental level. What is an emotion?
Great. Well, I'm actually going to even start one step further back, if that's okay. What is evolutionary psychology? That might be a first place to start. So, evolutionary psychology is an approach to psychology. It uses the science of evolutionary biology and the principles of evolutionary biology, in addition to what we've learned from the cognitive synthesis. So, the cognitive revolution in terms of the fact that the mind is an information processor. So evolutionary psychologists are very interested in understanding the circuit board that is sitting on our shoulders. And you can understand it in two different ways. You can understand the hardware in terms of the neural instantiation, the chemicals and neurotransmitters and so forth, and the circuitry, or you can understand it in terms of software. What kind of information processing is running on that hardware? And so folks understand this, I think, really easily today because we have things like, mobile phones with hardware that we can update the software. And not only that, we have apps that we can download that increase the functionality of our phone. So as each kind of new update of our phone comes out, we get additional upgrades that allow more apps to talk to one another. But that's all software. And that kind of additional software is what leads to our phone's functionality. Evolutionary psychologists are very interested in what are the programs that evolved that comprise kind of our human nature. And we come from the perspective of, first off, nothing arises out of nowhere, right? So these programs and human behavior didn't just pop into existence. There had to have been forces that forged them over evolutionary time. And so evolutionary psychologists like to think of, okay, what were the problems? What were those forces that endured over many, many generations that would have crafted and selected for certain types of information processing programs? But that might all sound so. One of the misconceptions about evolutionary psychology, it's some form of genetic determinism and or environmental determinism. Both are equally wrong. But evolutionary psychologists approach each program, each system, asking what problem did it evolve to solve, and then what information is required to solve that problem. And some information, sure, is native. Some kind of information is privileged, built in, and we're kind of born with a human basic operating system. But that operating system also requires a lot of input. And so, your keyboard doesn't know what dissertation you're going to write. It requires the input, right, in order to do it, but it has all the systems that allow you to do that. And so the real question is, what information is required to solve every problem? Is some of it native that didn't vary, that evolution could have made a little bit more kind of instinctive, if you will, and what kind of is supplied by the world? So we all have a language system, but what language we speak very much depends on the culture we are born into. And so that would be like a quick overview of evolutionary psychology is we're really interested in the mental programs, the mental apps that evolve to guide human behavior. So then the question is, okay, what's an emotion? So sorry. So here's we go back to
Absolutely
your
fine.
question. So what's an emotion? From this perspective, emotions also are really interesting programs, right? They didn't come out of nowhere. They seem to be very consistent, very reliable across all humans, across cultures, across time. So the question is, did emotions evolve to solve particular types of problems? And that's the approach evolutionary psychologists take. So if I had to define what an emotion is kind of technically, I would say it's an information processing program that evolved to solve a, recurring long-standing problem that our ancestors faced. And an emotion is a special kind of program in the sense that it coordinates across all elements of psychology and physiology. So an emotion is kind of a superordinate. It's kind of like the parent program that basically says, all right, we're in this situation, deploy the memory here, get the attention going here, stop the digestion, get the muscles going, da, 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 right? So it is a coordination system. And then that starts to lead into other questions about the specific emotions. But that's how I would explain what an emotion is from an evolutionary point of view. It's a program that evolved to solve a long-standing problem.
That's thank you. That's really well kind of explained. And I think, yeah, it's really important to go back to the evolutionary traits and evolutionary reasons for emotion existing. And I love it. You put the way you put it as information processing program. I think that's what people are coming to understand, especially nowadays, as we begin to make sense of all these different emotions that happen to us, we start to understand is actually a superordinate. On that point, then, do these emotions appear? Because it feels like, lived experience, it feels like an emotion just would appear, and I'm like, "Where did it come from? What is the process of emotions? How does it appear? How does it kind of happen to us over, in our bodies and also in our lived experience?"
Sure. So I can answer part of that question. So I mean, this is a whole like, life's worth of study, worth of studying to get a complete answer. But the way I approach it is this. I first so to characterize any emotional state from an evolutionary point of view, maybe I don't need to say that anymore. So assume that everything I say is from an evolutionary point of view from here on out. Um, First, you have to characterize what situation you're in, right? So the question is, what's the problem to be solved? And so, for instance, predator avoidance, right? So predator detection, predator avoidance. And so, so being able to detect predators and avoid their, deadly effects. And so the question then is, how do you know you're in the presence of a predator? So that's theoretical. The idea that, yeah, predators are bad. Do you want to stay away from predators? But then the question is, okay, well, then how does the system actually work? Well, in our brain, there has to be some type of kind of radar sweeping in terms of trying to detect, is there a predator present in my environment? And how do you know? You know, based on the cues that would have correlated with with predator presence over, over evolutionary history. So, seeing a large fanged animal, right? Hearing some breathing. So, for fans of Jurassic Park, it was the thud, and seeing the water vibrate, knowing that there was a very large animal afoot. Um, and so, but also other cues can signal to our brain a greater probability that there could be a predator present. And some of those cues might actually be the absence of information. So, for instance, just the cue of nighttime what is nighttime? Nighttime in and of itself is nothing. But to our brain, we have circuitry that associates nighttime with with information that I cannot detect ambush or predator presence far enough in advance with my visual system. So I need to have a greater vigilance for my environment. And so that's going to affect our kind of all of our perceptual systems, right? When you're home alone at night, sometimes you hear things, right? You hear a creak, you hear a rustling outside, and what's that? What that? Like, is that someone? And so you hear your house settling and you hear things outside, and it seems like it only happens at night, but that's not so. In fact, those noises are happening during the daytime too. It's just not rising to the threshold of conscious awareness because your system is set to say, ah, in the daytime, I have the ability to visually determine whether there's a threat present or not. At nighttime, you do not. So these systems have to take hold of you. Basically, they activate and say, hey, explore, look around, investigate, collect information, what's going on. And so, so I know it sounds like we're puppets kind of being a little bit mastered by these strings, but in fact, I have to say we kind of are. These are programs. We're not acting in a random way. We're acting in a very, very patterned, non-random way. And this is by virtue of really excellent, elegant, complex, flexible programming. so um and so in any case, so how do you know so sometimes you won't even, I mean, I think normally you know why you're feeling a certain way, but there could be situations where something is happening, your system has detected it and puts you on in a kind of high vigilant um conditions so that you are now monitoring your environment a little bit better. So once you've detected a situation, then depending on the situation, that program deploys. So maybe parts of your psychology, so your memory kind of goes in one direction. What you think your goals and motivations should be something very different. Your utterances, your behavior, your nonverbal communication might change, how your physiology gears up for it. So let me give you another very, very silly example, and then I'll let you move on. But the one of the emotions I've studied is disgust, and one of the interesting things about disgust and nausea is if for anyone who's ever come home late at night or woken up at 2 in the morning and been like, "Oh, I'm not feeling that great," and so rush to the bathroom and what are you thinking? Like, you're so first off, your program of like rid your body of a toxin is in motion, right? It's not like do your taxes or time to go on social media and how am I doing in my friendship circles? I mean, there's so many things you're not doing, right? So it's very targeted. But memory systems can very much be redirected. So now instead of kind of, being there hovering in the bathroom, you're not like, "Oh my god, is the garage door open?" And, "Did I call my sister back?" No, it's like, "What did I eat?" Right? It's, "What did I eat? When did I eat it? What could it have been? Oh my gosh, I need to avoid that in the future." So your memory very much gets redirected to understand what's going on. But none of that's random. It's all kind of part of the programming of ingested a toxin. It's a learning component of this system of, make sure you tag whatever you might have ingested as not preferable or as desirable in the future, and so forth. So emotions can activate and deactivate different parts of the body depending on what the problem was that they were trying to solve.
That's so fascinating. That is so fascinating, especially with the understanding of it taking the conception of it as a program and how it deploys and how because of the fact that it's a program, it can be deployed in significant ways which are kind of masked to ourselves. You give the example of disgust when you're going into that, you know there's something physically wrong. Maybe you've ate something, and so your emotion will just pop up like, okay, I need to get rid of it. But, like, you don't understand that the program is not running until that moment, maybe it's running in the background. So it's like that understanding too. What I wanted to do before we really get into the nitty-gritty of it was kind of
Yeah.
distinguish what emotion isn't. So we understand what emotion is, but what isn't emotion? How do we distinguish emotions from, like, moods or thoughts or, like, even personality?